The Grant Mansion was a fortress of glass, steel, and marble, perched high above the Hudson, like a monument to ambition. Tonight, however, it felt like a tomb. Rain streaked down the floor-to-ceiling windows, drumming a soft, steady rhythm that only emphasized the emptiness of its grand halls. Alexander Grant sat alone in his leather chair, staring at the fire crackling in the marble hearth. He was a man the business world either admired or feared, sometimes both. His name opened doors, moved markets, and bent rivals to their knees. Yet in that vast silence, none of it mattered. His chest ached with a strange heaviness, one he couldn't explain. In his hand, he turned over a black credit card, its surface glinting under the golden light. Once, it had been just another tool of power, a symbol of excess. But now, looking at it, he felt something else, a memory of the woman who had taken it and used it not for herself, but for something that had broken him open in ways no betrayal ever had. For decades, Alexander had believed he had seen it all: greed, manipulation, ambition. His empire had been built brick by brick with ruthless precision. But what Elena Ramirez had done with that card, that was something he would never forget. Elena Ramirez was not the kind of woman who drew attention. She carried herself quietly, blending into the background of Alexander's mansion like one of its carefully polished fixtures. In her late 30s, she was modestly dressed, her dark hair often pulled back in a simple bun. But Alexander noticed things others would have ignored. He saw the way her shoes were worn thin, mended more than once with neat stitches. He saw her tucking away leftover bread and fruit after dinner, wrapping them in napkins before slipping them into her worn tote bag. He noticed how her hands sometimes trembled when she thought no one was watching, and how her eyes carried an exhaustion that went deeper than work. One evening, Alexander returned home earlier than expected and found her in the lounge. She wasn't cleaning. She was standing by the grand piano, her fingers hovering above the keys but not daring to press them. Her eyes shimmered with tears. She quickly brushed away when she noticed him. She bowed her head, muttered an apology, and hurried off. That image haunted him. A woman working tirelessly in silence, carrying invisible weight, with no one to notice but him, the man least likely to care. The turning point came on a gray Thursday evening. Alexander left the office early, unusual for him, and stepped quietly into his kitchen. There, he found Elena with her phone pressed to her ear, her usually calm features twisted with fear. He caught fragments of her whispered words. Hospital, treatment. Please wait. I'll find a way. When she hung up, she wiped her tears quickly and froze when she realized he was standing there. I'm sorry, sir, she stammered, bowing her head. Alexander, to his own surprise, didn't scold her. He didn't demand explanations. Something inside him stirred, something he hadn't felt in years. Compassion. The next morning, he walked into the kitchen with his usual sternness. He set his black credit card on the counter. Take it, he said curtly. Elena's eyes widened. Sir, I can't. No questions. No excuses. Just do what you need to do, Alexander interrupted, his tone brooking no argument. Her hands trembled as she picked up the card, as though it were a burning coal. Her lips quivered as she whispered, "Thank you." He waved her off, pretending it meant nothing. But inside, something shifted. Days later, the monthly statement arrived on his desk. Alexander opened it without thought, ready to see the indulgences of a maid who'd briefly tasted luxury. But what he saw made him freeze. There were no charges at designer boutiques, no bills from fine restaurants, no splurges on jewelry or handbags. Instead, there were payments to Brooklyn Children's Hospital, pharmacies, medical supply stores, and, curiously, a small floral shop. Alexander's throat tightened. His mind replayed Elena's phone call, her trembling hands, the tears at the piano. Something inside him cracked. He slammed the paper down and called his driver. Find out where she went that night. Hours later, Alexander stood outside a modest children's hospital. The smell of antiseptic hung in the air, mingling with faint laughter and the quiet beeping of machines. Through a glass window, he saw Elena. She sat beside a hospital bed, holding the hand of a small boy. He was pale but smiling weakly, clutching a stuffed toy as though it were his lifeline. Elena's eyes were filled with exhaustion and fierce love as she whispered softly to him. "Who is he?" Alexander asked a passing nurse. "Her son," the nurse said gently. "Mateo, he's 8. He has leukemia. She's been fighting for months, working double shifts, skipping meals, doing everything she can. But it's never enough." Alexander felt the air leave his lungs. His hand gripped the glass as though he might fall. Elena hadn't used his card for herself. She had used it to keep her son alive. The next day, Alexander returned. This time, he stepped into the ward. Elena looked up, startled. Fear flashed in her eyes. "Mr. Grant, I'm sorry. I never meant." Alexander raised his hand, silencing her. He turned to the boy. "Hello, Mateo." Mateo blinked up at him, surprised, then offered a small smile. "Hi." That simple word, spoken with fragile courage, did something to Alexander's heart. For the first time in years, he felt it soften. Over the next hour, he stayed. He listened as Mateo spoke about his love for music. Before leaving, Alexander returned with a gift, a small portable keyboard. Mateo's face lit up like the sun. Elena's tears flowed freely. From that moment, Alexander made a decision. He hired the best doctors. He covered every bill. He even began drafting a trust fund for Mateo's future. Elena protested, shaking her head. "Sir, I can never repay you." Alexander looked at her quietly. "You already have." Weeks turned into months. Alexander became a regular presence in Mateo's life. He read him stories, brought puzzles and books, even played piano with him on the keyboard. The boys' laughter echoed in the sterile hospital room, softening even the coldest corners of Alexander's heart. At the same time, memories of his own estranged son haunted him. Once, years ago, that boy had clutched his hand the same way Mateo did now, before neglect and distance drove them apart. Guilt gnawed at Alexander. But Mateo's courage, Elena's quiet strength, gave him something he hadn't dared believe he still had, a second chance. Elena's life began to shift. For the first time in years, she could breathe. Mateo's treatments improved, and hope replaced despair. For Alexander, the change went deeper. He started calling his own son, apologizing for years of absence. The conversations were awkward, halting, but real. Slowly, bridges began to mend. Every visit to the hospital felt like redemption. Alexander wasn't just saving Mateo's life. He was saving his own. One rainy night, Alexander sat again in his mansion, the fire glowing low. In his hand was that same black credit card. Once, it had been nothing more than plastic, his weapon in a world of wealth and power. Now, it was a symbol of something greater. To Elena, it had been a lifeline. To Mateo, a chance at life. To Alexander, the beginning of redemption. He set the card down on his desk, not as a tool of business, but as a reminder of a humanity he had nearly lost. Sometimes the smallest act of trust can change not just one life, but many. Sometimes what breaks your heart also puts it back together. And for Alexander Grant, it all began with the day his maid used his card. If you like the story, please subscribe to the channel.